Wow. I've never had an introduction like that. That was a little awe-inspiring. Before I get started today, I'd like to have all of us put our hands together to thank the people that behind the scenes really make this event work, which are the volunteers. So big round of applause for them, please. So my talk is Accountability in Design. Our history will be what we make it. And when I was thinking about this talk, I'm relating it to the human experience, I wanted us to start thinking about accountability beyond just the results. That's typically how we look at accountability. I am responsible for a result, a wireframe, a deliverable. But a lot of the times, I think in this day and age, we need to be vigilant about our own behavior. We are a very, very young discipline, and we need to start being accountable and start looking at it more as an intrinsic characteristic. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that we need to start being aware of our own behavior in the eyes of the people that we're trying to get buy-in from. Over the last 10 years, I've had the absolute privilege of mentoring over 100 designers the world over. About 7 years ago, I got into this thing called podcasting, and it got me invited to conferences on information architecture, interaction design, user experience. And I've had the pleasure of learning from the biggest names in design around the world and passing on that knowledge to the people that I've mentored. And I really think we need to start looking at how that impacts us. So as an example, this is a framework that my father passed down to me. Now, my father was the director of engineering for DuPont, and he worked with the top minds and leaders in the Fortune 50 and Fortune 100 companies the world over for his entire career. And this framework was one that he didn't post up in his office wall. He didn't give it to people to put up in their different departments to share. It was one that he had memorized and tried to ensure that every day he worked towards modeling this behavior, whether it was the custodian on the shop floor or whether it was the CEO of the global corporation. He tried to instill within everyone and all the teams that he worked with these characteristics. So working from the concept that everyone experiences a sense of individuality and self-expression. There's a capacity to express compassion and to develop close relationships. There's a way of reacting with spontaneity, integrity, and integration. And there's a drive towards self-expression, actions, and creative experiences. And there is an ability to reason and exchange ideas with others. Now, since the information age has kicked in, I think in particular this last point, we're losing that capacity in many ways. In fact, back in 1977, there were two social psychologists, Schifrin and Schneider. And for the kids in the room, in 1977, there were none of these mobile device things we're walking around with. The internet hadn't been invented yet. We actually communicated with one another in ways that involved social interactions, not social media. And they came up with two human processes theories of detection, search, and attention. The first is what they called click-whir responding. Kind of like a Pavlovian dog response. You know, the bell rings, the dog salivates after a while when you start pairing it with food. And we've gotten to the point now where we're very much living that kind of world. We don't really think about things as deeply as we should, in my professional opinion. We're talking about 140 characters. Not 140 minutes of discussion and debate of ideas, not 140 pages of research or text or concepts that agree with, or even more importantly in this day and age, concepts and ideas that we don't necessarily agree with to help us think more deeply about what we're doing. Marshall McLuhan, the University of Toronto professor who tagged has the famous quote, "The medium is the message," meaning that the characteristics of the medium are more important than the content delivered through that medium. He said in an interview around 1977 on a news program that the television as a technology can only actually engage an audience for 4 to 6 minutes of the content that's being delivered through that medium. We're now down to the point where we're keeping our conversations as limited as this screen, and the interactions that people are having on this screen are between 4 to 6 seconds. And as a result of that, especially in this industry, I think we need to look at the phenomenal capacity of people beyond the well-known designers that get a lot of publicity and attention. Because quite frankly, over the last few years in particular, now, this is based on my experience of all of the experiences I've had over the last 15 years of interviewing and learning from all these professionals. I've learned more and had greater creative insights from the junior designers that have reached out to me to be mentored than I have from the biggest names in design the world over. Because we've gotten to a point now where click-whir is described as, rather than thinking about an expert's arguments and being convinced or not, we frequently ignore the arguments and allow ourselves to be convinced just by the expert's status as expert. I'm an expert, I wrote a book. I'm an expert, I'm speaking at a conference. I'm an expert, I interviewed a bunch of people on a podcast. And there's nothing wrong with that label. If you are taking the time to write a book, which typically takes a year to a year and a half, clearly you're putting a lot of thought, effort, and study into that. But we need to make sure that we don't automatically assume that the speaker or the person we're reading from or engaging with is automatically right. We need to get rid of this automatic response that much of the technology today is driving. Because the other side of this theory around attention, detection, and search is something that's called controlled responding. So a couple of years ago, Christina Mauser and I were invited to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, to help an e-commerce company in the United States think about how they need to rethink their e-commerce strategy. Their company involves selling gold and silver online to people in the United States and around the world. The young lad with the blue shirt there is me, and the CEO is to my right. And everyone in the room was vice presidents, director of marketing. They were sales agents from around the world. And this is on the last day, but halfway through the second day, something remarkable happened. We were walking them through ideas, helping to understand who their users were, what technology they used. And the junior designer in the room started questioning for clarity the processes and the goals that the CEO and the senior vice presidents were laying out. He pointed to the personas in the room that the entire team helped create, and the conversation quickly shifted from opinions working towards facts and people saying, you know what? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is anymore. And that laid the foundation for the conversation to move forward. There was no more click-whir responding. The CEO says it's true. It's got to be true. We just don't need to think about this anymore. We're just going to blindly follow them forward. The entire team recognized that. And they got to the point where halfway through the second day, the junior designer took over the entire conversation, to the extent that Christina and I just slowly backed our way out of the room. And he came and got us over an hour later and said, I'm so sorry. I can't believe we took over your workshop. And I was like, no, you don't need to apologize. That's exactly the point behind all of the work that we're doing in the field of user experience. It's not just about the people we're designing for. Most of people's issues today in the user experience world comes down to, how do I get buy-in for my ideas? And this, when we can move away from the click-whir responding, controlled responding is the tendency to react on the basis of a thorough analysis of all of the information. And you can't get to all of the information if all you're doing is having your head down in your iPhone, tweeting all the time, or texting each other back and forth about what's happening. We need greater social interactions. So during this presentation, I don't want you to tweet about my talk. I know the social media people who've set up this conference for 2 years are going to kill me for saying that. But what I want you to do is I want you to think. I don't expect you to necessarily agree with everything that I'm saying about my perspective on the industry and the things we need to focus on moving forward, and that's okay. And I hope that this will encourage you to carry on conversations, whether you agree with me or not. This is one person's experience, and we have hundreds here at the conference that I hope you draw from. Because at the end of the day, I am going to challenge your assumptions about the industry, likely your beliefs about the industry and processes within the industry. Lean UX, Agile, Waterfall, these are all processes to help us get to an end state, which are fine, but they're not answers in and of themselves. They're simply approaches to get to where we need to be, but if we don't focus on the end state and agree with the people we're working with and the people we're designing for about how to get there, then a lot of this is just sort of fluff, and it's a lot of debate, and it's opinion-based design that doesn't get us to what we need. So I want to provide you with a framework for your own thinking by starting in the past. In the 1920s, there was a revolution, really, within technology. There was this big box with wires and lights inside of it called a radio. And it changed the way in which we started learning about information around the world. We were still reading newspapers. People were interacting more often than they do today by any extent. But we were slowly, this is the first step in moving towards this click-whir mentality that I was talking about earlier. But we were engaged, and we were coming together as families and as a community to hear about the times and what was happening during those times. Then in the 40s and 50s, this other box with some wires and lights inside of it started dominating the homes in North America in particular. And we started paying less attention to each other in social interactions, and we started paying more and more attention to the content coming out of this box. During that time, probably the one that started the revolution around mass media today was a gentleman by the name of Edward R. Murrow. Now, we talk a lot about leaders and business and design, but Edward Murrow, in my mind, was indicative of what a leader of a new technology or a new approach that impacts humanity is really all about. He didn't sacrifice the truth with what was going on for sponsors or the networks or what they thought they should be doing based on opinions. He always focused on the facts. And at the end of his career, CBS gave him an award. And instead of the typical awards that you see given out today where people get up on stage and there's a big red carpet and it's all about me, 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 and thank you, Mom, and thank you, Dad, and whatnot, he got up on stage in front of his peers and delivered a speech, the first half of which I'd like to read to you now. And I want you to think about this in the context of what's happening today. He began by saying, "This might just do nobody any good. At the end of this discourse, a few people may accuse this reporter of fouling his own comfortable nest, and your organization may be accused of having given hospitality to heretical and even dangerous ideas. But the elaborate structure of networks, advertising agencies, and sponsors will not be shaken or altered. It is my desire, if not my duty, to try to talk to you journeymen with some candor about what is happening to radio and television, and if what I say is responsible, I alone am responsible for the saying of it. Our history will be what we make it. And if there are any historians about 50 or 100 years from now, and there should be preserved the kinescopes of 1 week of all 3 networks, they will there find, recorded in black and white and in color, evidence of decadence, escapism, and insulation from the realities of the world in which we live. We are currently wealthy, fat, comfortable, and complacent. We have a built-in allergy to unpleasant or disturbing information. Our mass media reflect this. But unless we get up off our fat surpluses and recognize that television in the main is being used to distract, delude, amuse, and insulate us, then television and those who finance it, those who look at it, and those who work at it may see a totally different picture too late." The first half of that speech, to me, there's a lot of sentiments that have been echoed 60 years later. The only real difference, in fact, is the medium. We have similar struggles, and we need to keep moving forward and identifying these. We struggle with legitimacy, as I noted at the beginning. We struggle with an understanding that ultimately we want to be taken seriously. We want to see that our ideas are of value and that we're valued in all of the processes that we undertake in the design world. A couple of years ago, I was in Vancouver meeting with a couple of colleagues, including meeting Cara Pecknold for the first time. And while we were there, we started a debate with a couple of colleagues of mine, one of whom was a designer, another of whom of mine was an information architect who really was passionate about the semantic web and the details. And as we moved forward, I shared a framework with them for why I thought communities of practice and the design world in general had a hard time coming together to define that end state. Because in many cases, as I told Cara, we seem to be putting the cart before the horse. We seem to be talking about process. We seem to be talking about the tools and the technology without really focusing on the people. Because the term user in user experience is almost becoming synonymous in my mind, with the robots with which we're designing. We need to move back to the human side of things. And we need to recognize that over the last 10 years, we've come into play with 3 entities that have been around since the times of Socrates and Plato. The first of which is big business. Now, you can think of big business as the director of communications, the CEO, the CFO, whatever label you want to associate it with. But their bottom line, their fundamental interest is about making money. It's about a return on investment. That's what they're passionate about. That's what really matters to them. And if we don't speak to those needs, understand those stresses and how they go about making money, and recognize that the Industrial Revolution is over. Putting part A into part B to make widget C, whatever the product is, and simply making money and knowing how much everything costs to associate that return on investment, those days in many cases are gone. We don't work in local economies anymore. We work in a truly global economy. And we need to recognize that the business leaders of today are facing challenges that their fathers and fathers before them never had to face in their entire careers or lifetime. The other area are what I would refer to as academics, researchers, marketers, people who have worked within print since the time of the printing press, all the way up to today. Their focus has nothing to do with return on investment, but rather trying to continue to find better and new ideas, building off the wisdom of past research and the history that humans have all brought to the table. My biggest frustration in the discipline of information architecture, and one that's common within the discipline itself, was they keep trying to define the damn thing over and over and over again. What is IA? What is IA? And it really bothered me that they kept doing that, because I'm like, well, why do you need to keep challenging your... And then I'm like, right, because the foundations of the discipline go back to library sciences. It's all about academia. It's all about trying to improve and evolve that. But the difference between academia's bottom line in terms of constantly trying to find the next best solution, based on the research that's out there, versus that of the return on investment of the business, are completely opposite. They don't align at all. But without the research, business can't make informed decisions today. And then, of course, we have the engineer. The engineer, the architect, however you want to define it. In today's world, it's about the code. It's about the bytes. It's about making sure things line up. And fundamentally, for the engineer, on its surface, their job is very simple. Does it work? Is the server plugged in? Are things working? Is the code functioning the way it should? Is it meeting the specs and the designs and everything else? And if it is, it works. On its surface, it's simple. Underneath, its complexity rivals anything most humans have had to tackle in recent memory, in fact, in any of human history, because of the depth and the breadth in which we're dealing with data. There's actually a term now for the measurement of data on the World Wide Web. It's called a yotta. It's 10 to the 28th power. That's how we're measuring the amount of information that we're working with online. Well, it's not really information, it's just data. It's chaos. So we've got the return on investment fundamental bottom line with the business. We've got the academic that wants to keep challenging and looking for new and better ideas. And we've got the engineer that wants to make sure the technology and everything's up to spec and working together. 10 years later, over the last 10 to 15 years, we've got the UX designer coming in and going, I know you don't know, but I've got some wireframes that are going to make everything better. Really? Right? And the problem is, now that we're in the information age, what's happening in my experience is, as you have conversations with all these people in these organizations, when they don't know, it's intimidating for them to say, I don't know. And in many cases, they can't or they won't. We're coming in and we're having conversation asking about, well, who are the people using your technology? How are you running your business? And eventually that conversation bleeds over into us inferring that we need to tell them how to better run their business, how to better do research, what technologies they should be using. And that's a very difficult point to try to sell, because we are living in a time of what I define as, or what Cialdini defined as pluralistic ignorance. In general, when we are unsure of ourselves, when the situation is unclear or ambiguous, when uncertainty reigns, we are most likely to look to and accept the actions of others as correct. This is based on basic social psychology. Across cultures, the world over, this is what we do. This is why the click we're responding of the expert without questioning the expert, following the top 5, top 10 best practices, is become so entrenched in everything that we're doing today. We need to develop the capacity to say simply, I don't know, but I'll find out for you, and let's work together to figure that out. Because as David Foster Wallace noted, the real value of education has almost nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with simple awareness. Awareness of the foundational elements that these individuals we're working with every day face, what their needs are, what their stress points are. We talk all about being experts in human experience, in the user experience. In my professional opinion, we need to expand that conversation far beyond the persona to working and sitting down and interacting with people face to face. Because as the famous designer Charles Eames once noted, eventually everything connects. And in the information age, I would argue that eventually everyone connects. And as Murrow noted in the first half of the speech that I read, he noted 60 years ago that he found evidence of decadence, escapism, and isolation from the realities of the world in which we live. And I would argue today that technology and the click word type responsing in which we're moving, in all 4 of those areas, there's evidence of that across the board. This can be resolved by learning to communicate more effectively beyond the 140 characters, beyond the saying, I'm responsible because I sent the email. But we need to be vigilant as designers in leading that conversation and getting us to a point where we can get the buy-in and the trust and the respect of the people that we're working with. We struggle with courage. The courage to say the right thing, the courage to challenge traditional ideas and ideals. Courage extends far beyond the everyday courage to speak up and say, this is the best practice, though, in my professional opinion. We talk about the human experience. And we talk about experiences we need to understand, and we need to engage in experiences that extend far beyond the courage to do these things. Because when you expand your experiences, you also expand your perspective. Where things used to be seen as taking a lot of courage can suddenly be seen as pretty insignificant, calming, and easy to manage your way through. In fact, I asked on the 140-character tweet, Al Shanavtar, about what we would define as courage. I asked many people this, but I think Alshan's quote came up best when he said, courage is enduring fear to do the right thing. And that's a hard thing to do, and I think it's bang on. The right thing for other people, for beyond just yourself, because we are talking about human experiences here. And I think one of the most engaging talks that I ever had the privilege of hearing was when Adaptive Path in 2008, 2009 invited me to their conference, UX Week. And I had the privilege of interviewing this gentleman, Jake Barton, who runs a company called StoryCorps. StoryCorps is this remarkable portable unit that drives around to different locations, and inside the unit is a recording studio. And 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people can sit down, and the point behind it is that for people to share short stories about an experience in their life that really touched them, that could have an impact on other people if they heard it afterwards. All of these recordings are in the Library of Congress in the United States, and they have a huge impact in the way in which you start to understand the courage that other people have. Now, 2 years ago, my father lost his battle with cancer, and it was tough. And when I found a particular story right now, an audio file that I want to share with you about a young lady who was struggling with and survived cancer of the spine. The father and daughter have a conversation about that human experience. The father's a tattoo artist, and, well, I'll let the story speak for itself.
From the very first surgery, when I walked into that ICU, it really, really shocked me. You were so swollen up, and you had a lot of tubes connected to you. I didn't think it was you, and it just was really, really hard to see my baby like that.
Yeah.
I hated that you were in the hospital, and it was incredibly painful for you.
I couldn't even sit up, it was so painful.
That's right. But then, at the same point, there was a lot of good in it because I got to spend so much time with you.
I remember we would get tattoo pens from the gift shop. You would like draw a little bumblebee on me and a little rose because that's my favorite flower.
Yeah. from your sternum down to your pelvic bone, you had a pretty good scar. And so we make that one into the stem of a flower. And then to the left of that is a scar from your feeding tube during chemo.
I call it my second belly button.
That's right. And we would turn that one into a butterfly.
And you promised on my 18th birthday we would go get a tattoo together.
What do you feel that you've learned from cancer?
I think I learned that you don't always have to keep like your tears in, and you just gotta believe that you can do this. It's turned me into a mini adult. And my friend, he had brain cancer, and I went up to him and I'm like, I know you're scared, but the doctors told me that I won't live too, and you gotta believe that you can make it. And he just started crying and he hugged me, and his grandma came up and she hugged hard. So Dad, how do you think I handled this happening to me?
You're an amazing person, and it's going to be exciting for me to watch you continue to grow and develop into a young lady, because your maturity has done nothing but inspire me to be a better person. And the strength that you demonstrated through so many of your procedures gave me the energy to be strong there for you.
Do you still worry about me?
Every day, every minute. But I'm not worried about this cancer coming back anymore, because you've kicked its butt.
Yeah.
You've beat it.
So it's interesting when I share these kinds of stories with people, I don't ever see anyone's iPhone on. I don't see anyone talking. Typically, it's that connection with other people. And we need to recognize that ultimately these kinds of experiences and expanding our own experiences beyond what is a very small community when it comes to design compared to business, academia, engineering, and traditional areas that have, again, date back to the time of Socrates and Plato. We need to recognize these are important because we need to keep expanding our own perspective beyond the tiny screen that is the iPhone or the Android. Because the amygdala, the part of our brain, doesn't have the capacity to deal with long-term consequences of our actions, only fight or flight. In other words, we need to keep thinking about the future. We need to keep expanding our experiences beyond the everyday. Because when we do that, we develop the ability to question without arguing with people, to ask why without attacking other people. We're losing the sense. For the last 10 years, I've been telling people social skills trump tech skills. They always will. I remember about 10, 11 years ago, I was at a conference and Adobe was putting up this new tool they had online with an element where you could grab objects and drag and drop them to the screen, and they were coded. It was amazing. Now today, of course, we do that all the time without even thinking about it. And that's when it dawned on me that ultimately if technology keeps moving at this pace, the ability to code is going to be important, no question. But the absolute necessity to bring people together to focus on ideas is what's going to really matter. One of my favorite modern poets is a gentleman by the name of Taylor Malley. And he expresses much of this idea about how we've become, quoting Taylor, the most aggressively inarticulate generation to come along in a long time ago in this particular poem, which I think speaks to the lack of social interactions that we're having today.
In case you didn't notice, it has somehow become uncool to sound like you know what you're talking about, or believe strongly in what you're, saying. Invisible question marks and parenthetical you knows, and you know what I'm saying, have been attaching themselves to the ends of our sentences, even when those sentences aren't like questions, Declarative sentences, so-called because they used to declare things to be true, okay, as opposed to other things that are totally, not. They've been infected by this tragically cool and totally hip interrogative tone, as if I'm saying, don't think I'm a nerd just because I've noticed this. I have nothing personally invested in my own opinions. I'm just inviting you to join me on the bandwagon of my own uncertainty. What has happened to our conviction? Where are the limbs out on which we once walked? Have they been chopped down with the rest of the rainforest? Or do we have nothing to say? Has society just become so filled with these conflicting feelings of bleh that we've just gotten to the point that we're just totally, just like, absolutely, just like, whatever. And so actually our disarticulation-ness, it's a noun, right? Our disarticulationosity is just a clever kind of it's like this, it's like a thing that we put up in front of us to disguise the fact that we've become the most aggressively inarticulate generation to come along since, you know, like a long time ago. So I implore you, I entreat you, and I challenge you to speak with conviction, to say what you believe in a manner that bespeaks the determination with which you believe it. Because contrary to the wisdom of the bumper sticker, it is not enough these days to simply question authority. You gotta speak with it, too.
And we do need to learn to speak with conviction. But we also need to understand and recognize that we are, again, a very young discipline. And unless we can speak to experience rather than preaching about process and best practices, speaking with conviction and not knowing or having that experience, especially that broader experience, comes across as arrogant and closed-minded. We need to be able to speak with those experiences, and they're not done by simply sending out a tweet or writing a blog post. It's about going out, interacting with other people, learning from others. A couple of years ago, I gave a talk at a conference in Ottawa, UX Camp Ottawa, where I suggested that if you want to learn about leadership and teamwork, yeah, you can go and talk to the CEO of a tech company if you want, or a project manager of a popular app. But if you really want to learn about a human experience when it comes to leadership and teamwork, go talk to a firefighter. These men and women put their lives on the line every single day, and if they don't know who's leading or they don't work as a team, people die. You want to learn about stress management? Go talk to a nurse on a trauma ward. They deal with life and death every day. They counsel families. They deal with real world stress. And when you start to learn from these people, much in the way service design, for example, is moving towards in terms of going in and following around the people that are taking on those roles every day, you start to really empathize with the people going through those experiences. And you can have conversations that can lead to designs that will far exceed anything you would have imagined previously. Again, as Murrow noted, today, we are currently wealthy, fat, comfortable, and complacent. We may not be wealthy with respect to money. The global economy isn't necessarily at an all-time high by any stretch. But we are wealthy with information, wealthy with knowledge. And as a result of that, technology in many cases has caused us to become comfortable and complacent with our experience, with our understanding of what's most important. And I think we need to push way beyond that. We struggle with responsibility. Now, if accountability typically is about results, I think about responsibility as being our actions, our behavior, the way others perceive us in day-to-day life. In fact, most people, when you look at things historically, as with the historic speech from Edward R. Murrow, many people believe that modern design was born from the marriage of art and industry, at 901 Washington Boulevard in San Francisco. This is the Eames Corporation. And they were a remarkable group of people. Charles and Ray Eames developed a design firm that exceeded most expectations of anything that anyone would see today. If we look to the history of designers like Eames, for example, and learn from them, we'll see that a lot of the ideas we're seeing in design today with respect to the spaces we interact in and how we work with one another, they're not new. We're borrowing from that history, and a history that is so rich with respect to art and design beyond and before technology that we could really, quite frankly, blow the minds of business, academia, and engineers going forward if we take the time to slow down and think. Because their most remarkable invention of all things was a chair. They had entered a contest where they were using plywood originally to start forming the chair to put in the shape of the body. The plywood didn't quite work. They won the contest anyway, but they kept evolving the design. They brought people of different shapes and backgrounds to sit in the chair, play cards, do a number of other things, much like we talk about with respect to experience design today. And 30 years after this chair and many of the other furniture pieces that were developed by Eames moved forward, he was in an interview, and they asked him, said, did the chair come to you in a flash? And he just smiled and laughed, and he goes, well, actually, I think it came to me in a 30-year flash. Because it took him that long to iterate, to keep evolving the design and moving things forward. As Eames told one of his employees one time when she was working with him about her struggle with how to draw, Eames said to her, look, I can teach you how to draw. If you can think and you can see and you can prove that to me, then you can work here. He didn't care about her academic background. In fact, Charles Eames was a failed architect. Ray Eames was an artist who stopped painting once she started getting into the business entirely. The degree didn't matter. It was about the individual and their passion for their work and their compassion for other people within the business within which they were working. In fact, if we look even further back in history, the Eames Corporation and the way in which they designed things was taken from Bauhaus in Germany in the early 1900s, where the entire principle behind this school was about bringing together all forms of art to create a holistic mindset around what art could be, beyond what the expectation of it was at the time. And as a result, this is what Eames' office looked like. And it changed every day, constantly, depending on the projects they were working on. They would move walls, they would move things out of the way. They had train sets set up to create movies. They designed huge buildings for various ceremonies around the world. The idea behind this, of course, was that, as one Eames put it, it was more than just a search for the best change in design. It was always a process of learning by doing. We could never delegate understanding. We need to be better at facilitating understanding today. We can't delegate it. We can't tell people this is the best practice, trust me, it's going to work. We have to earn that trust and respect. Because most of the organizations and offices that people work in, at least in North America, look like this. There's absolutely nothing creative about this space. It's very much an industrial revolution approach to everything that we do. Because as Sturman noted, within systemic thinking, a lot of the times we think it's the small teams that we're working in, when in fact it's the entire company or it's the entire system within which we're working that's creating the larger problems that we face. Even neurologically, we need to understand the environments that we work in. The actions that we take are directly proportional to the spaces in which we're working. Because as Dr. Elizabeth Gould noted in 2009, if boring environments, stressful noises, and the organism's particular slot in the dominance hierarchy, and we could also associate that with the corporate hierarchy in terms of human behavior, if they all impact the architecture of the brain, and Gould's team have proved that they do, then the playing field isn't level. Poverty and stress aren't just an idea, they're an anatomy. Some brains never stand a chance. If we're working in a boring office environment and we're trying to come up with creative ideas, it is our responsibility to take action, to move to a different environment, to ensure that people can start feeling like they're of value and that their ideas can be created. Because again, as Murrow noted, much of what's going on today is being used to distract, delude, amuse, and insulate us. We aren't taking the time to be responsible for the actions we're taking with the technology that we're trying to interact with every day and move way beyond the technology to engage with other human beings. Because there are ways in which we do illuminate and inspire. This particular billboard is in Lima, Peru. People may have seen it. It went a little viral on Facebook. This area, this desert, only collects about 0.5 inches of rainfall every year, but the humidity is at 95%. And this billboard is engineered in a way that it pulls the humidity from the air, and with a filtration process that's in behind the billboard, actually has produced nearly 10,000 liters of clean drinking water for the impoverished areas and communities for families. Shashi Loves Learning, and the young lady's name is in African, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but this young lady is responsible for the TV program Shashi Loves Learning. She took this technology called television back in the day and created the sock puppet program with basic animation to educate children about the importance of hand sanitation. Because in Ethiopia, children don't go to school until they're 8 years old. So they don't learn about these things. And as a result of this TV program, which has gone out to hundreds of thousands of families around Africa now, she's helped to improve the health and well-being of families the world over. Coca-Cola brought together these two machines on the borders of Pakistan and India that would allow people to interact by drawing hearts and peace symbols and wave to one another and cheers each other with Cokes over a border that's been at war for over 60 years now to help bring communities together and to break down what mass media has ended up creating, which is this insane notion that somehow the differences between these two cultures are so extreme that they shouldn't be able to connect. Even this particular scientist found out a way of putting together different chemicals into a simple plastic water bottle and through sunlight capture that light and keep it in a way that would allow rooms in different areas to be lit up. This gentleman on the left in the green shirt actually lives in Nairobi. And Nairobi, of course, is a third world country and there's garbage all through the streets. One of the biggest problems in the shanty town in which they live are that the cabins that people live in have holes in the roofs. He found this particular video online of how to make this bottle and create this light, and he solved two problems with one solution. He went online, he found out the answer, and he ended up plugging up the holes in the roofs of these homes to provide light for families so that they could actually move forward with their own lives and their own interactions with other people and stay dry and warm. As he put it, really there's nothing you can't do with a little bit of effort if you really want to help your community. These two young ladies created a soccer ball. They're from Harvard. This soccer ball actually stores kinetic energy inside of it. So as children play with the soccer ball for 30 minutes, they can actually go home and plug in an LED light where 30 minutes of play will provide 3 hours of light so they can do their homework and interact with each other within their own families. If you consider yourself a junior designer, I'd like you to please stand up. Maybe you're new to the design world, you've been in for maybe 1 to 3 years, something along those lines. It's okay, there's no test, there's no bullshit bingo, I promise you. You, ladies and gentlemen, are the future of the user experience design world. Yes. You have a responsibility to take action, to have the courage to do the things that need to be done, to challenge the experts of today with respect, learn from their wisdom, but to move things far beyond where they are today in order to ensure the legitimacy of the discipline beyond now. Because, as this slide doesn't demonstrate, due to technical issues with exporting to Keynote, Anders Ericsson points out that ultimately you have to continue to push limits in the things that you're doing. You can't accept the norm, and you have to expect more failure at the beginning. Don't be discouraged, okay, when things don't work out right away, when there are problems, when people don't agree with what you're trying to convey immediately. That is always going to happen. But as the future of the discipline, we need you to keep challenging the status quo and to innovate as best you can. If you consider yourself a senior designer, I'd like you to please stand up. If you've been in the discipline for more than 3 years, let's say, you all are the reason why we're here today. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent. We're the reasons why we're here today, and we've brought it to this point. We need to find the courage to keep challenging for new ideas, to ensure the legitimacy of the discipline, and ultimately to take responsibility for our own actions. The UX community has a thing called a rock star status, which I believe does nothing but hurt the legitimacy of the discipline going forward. We cannot propel a small group of people to the top and the spotlight while ignoring or not learning from the creative wisdom and experiences of so many others. Because, as Larry Lessig noted, when he was talking about creativity and how the law is actually killing creativity, he talked about how we as adults or the older generation listen to music, whereas today kids remix music. He watched TV, kids make TV. As he noted about the laws that need to change in the world to protect those realities and those rights of their children, and I believe the same is true as senior designers, we ought to be able to do better, at least for them, for the junior designers, if not for opening for business. As Michio Kaku noted, human consciousness is a process of creating a model of our world in space and time. especially the future, by evaluating many feedback loops in various parameters in order to achieve a goal. This is based on a study of neuroscience, an understanding of how the brain works. When I talk about various parameters to achieve a goal, and the various feedback loops, the feedback loops in interacting and working with the engineers, the business leaders, the academics, and other designers. It's about continually working and expanding and stretching our own experiences so that we can understand and create that broader perspective. Because as the musician Passenger noted in a new song that's coming out in a couple of months, where it's called Scare Away the Dark, he said, when we all light up, we can scare away the dark. He said that we need to feel like we still have a choice. We need something more real than just hashtags and Twitter. And I think metaphorically, as the song indicates, it's not about lighting up with our iPads and our iPhones. It's about how we can all illuminate and inspire each other when we put the technology down and get back to the human community.
Well, sing at the top of your voice. Love without fear in your heart. Feel like you still have a choice. If we all light up, we can scare away the dark. Wish our weekdays away, spend our weekends in bed. We drink ourselves stupid and work ourselves dead, and all just because that's what Mum and Dad said we should do. We should run through the forests, we should swim in the streams, we should laugh, we should cry, we should love, we should dream, we should stare at the stars and not just the screens. You should hear what I'm saying and know what it means to sing. Sing at the top of your voice now. Oh, love without fear in your heart now. Feel like you still have a choice. If we all light up, we can scare away the dark. Well, we wish we were happier, thinner and fitter. We wish we weren't losers and liars and quitters. We want something more, not just nasty and bitter. We want something real, not just hashtags and Twitter. It's the meaning of life, and it's streamed live on YouTube. But I bet Gangnam Style would still get more views. And we're scared of drowning and flying with shooters, but we're all slowly dying in front of your computers. So sing at the top of your voice. In your heart, can you feel like you still have a choice? If we all light up, we can scare away the dark. I know, oh no, oh, nah, yeah. So sing at the top of your voice. Love without fear in your heart. Can you feel like you still have a choice? If we all light up, we can scare away the dark.
So taking a modern spin, finishing Edward R. Murrow's speech from the beginning of my presentation, I began by saying that our history will be what we make it. If we go on as we are, then history will take its revenge and retribution will not limp in catching up with us. Just once in a while, let us exalt the importance of ideas and information. Let us dream to the extent of saying that on a given Sunday night, a time normally occupied by arguing and hashtags on Twitter over meaningless trends, is giving over to a clinical survey on the state of Polish education. And a week or two later, a time normally used by watching epic fail clips on YouTube is devoted to a thoroughgoing study of environmental issues that impact us all. Would the corporate image of their respective sponsors be damaged? Would the shareholders rise up in their wrath and complain? Would anything happen other than a few million people that have received a little illumination on subjects that may well determine the future of this country, and therefore the future of the corporations? To those who say people wouldn't look, they wouldn't be interested, they're too complacent, indifferent, and insulated, I can only reply, there is, in one designer's opinion, considerable evidence against that contention. But even if they are right, what have they got to lose? Because if they are right, and this instrument is good for nothing but to entertain, amuse, and insulate, then the screen is flickering now, and we'll soon see that the whole struggle, in fact, everything we struggle for, is lost. This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, and yes, it can even inspire, but it can do so only to the extent that humans are willing to use it towards those ends. Otherwise, it is merely wires and lights in a box. Good night and good luck. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.